nearly 2,000 years, this Roman hill has held a special place in the hearts of the world's Catholics. This is the Vatican. Every year, millions of people flock to its chapels and museums. But now we take you where tourists aren't allowed. Behind the closed doors of one of the world's most mysterious and secretive places. The Vatican is headquarters of the worldwide Catholic Church. It's where the Pope lives, works, and spreads the gospel. We'll take you beyond the Basilica to where a Pope spends his most intimate moments, and into the dark recesses that hold the secrets of this ancient institution. Join us as we travel through history, from the bones of Jesus' first apostle, hidden for centuries in the catacombs deep beneath St. Peter's Basilica, into the Vatican's secret archives. The spiritual center of the world's Catholics. But today isn't just any day in the Holy City. The grounds are being prepared. Security is being heightened. And the Pope will address the faithful gathering in St. Peter's Square. As the eyes of his followers prepare to turn to the fourth-floor window of the Apostolic Palace, His Holiness Pope Benedict sits beside a different window, 35,000 feet in the air. The Holy Father is returning from a trip abroad, and our cameras are along for the ride. While the Pope does travel in style, he doesn't have his own airplane. This is a chartered Italian airliner, with some seats removed to give the Pope the legroom a pontiff deserves. And those impenetrable cockpit security doors, they open for the Pope.
Okay, thank you very much. Have a nice day. Have a safe trip.
Besides, security is less of a concern when you have 2 fighter jets escorting you home. As the pontiff touches down in Rome, the Italian military gives the Pope a lift. Flying him over Roman traffic and home to the Vatican. With His Holiness en route, Benedict's personal secretaries, Georg and Miroslav, prepare for the Pope's arrival. And while the crowd eagerly awaits a glimpse of the Holy Father, we take you inside the Pope's private office as he gathers himself for his weekly Sunday devotion, delivered from 4 stories above St. Peter's Square.
Cari fratelli e sorelle, il Vangelo di questa domenica contiene...
It's a very nice custom, although it's very hard to see the Pope from way down in the square, and you're looking at this little figure in white up there, you know, but it's moving.
While it's the Pope's public face that brings crowds to the Vatican, it's what isn't public that draws even more attention. At just over 100 acres, 8 Vatican cities could fit inside New York's Central Park. And although it's the smallest country in the world, behind its walls are history's most closely guarded secrets, the most coveted of which are held in the Vatican's secret archives. For centuries, the Vatican's secret vaults have been the subject of speculation and conspiracy theories. Some think it houses valuable artifacts stolen from Jerusalem during the Crusades. The secret archives are hidden in plain sight. The unmarked entrance is here, just off the staff parking lot next to the library. And directly beneath these parking spaces is a massive two-story underground bunker. Only the archivists are allowed inside the vaults of the archives. But we have been allowed to go farther and show you what it's really like inside the Vatican secret archives. Luca Carbone, curator of the archives, has granted us extraordinary access to this immense collection of historic documents. Here in the bunker are over 50 miles of shelves, centuries of closely guarded historic documents, the correspondence of royal families, papal letters, and top-secret memos.
Here we are in one of the 5 different depositories of the Vatican Secret Archives. Normally in this storage it's possible to enter only to the staff member.
One of the archive's more remarkable documents is a handwritten note from Michelangelo, dated January of 1550, while he was building the Dome of St. Peter's. The Pope was sick, and work on the basilica had been halted, so Michelangelo is pleading to a bishop for the 3 months of back pay owed his workers. "I'm begging your lordship," he wrote, "for St. Peter's sake, your servant, Michelangelo." Many believe that this is the origin of the popular phrase, "for Pete's sake." Amazingly, this letter was only discovered in the last decade. How could a handwritten document by such a world-famous artist go missing all these years? It's all Napoleon's fault. In 1808, Napoleon's goal of ruling Europe was within reach. With his armies poised in northern Italy, he insisted Pope Pius VII surrender the Papal States to France. The Pope answered by excommunicating him. So Napoleon ordered the Pope arrested. Then, to solidify his power over the papacy, Napoleon had the entire contents of the secret archives moved to Paris. The Pope and the secret archives remained locked up for nearly 5 years. When Napoleon's empire crumbled in 1815, Pius was freed, but the cost of transporting the entire archive back to Rome would have been enormous. So the cardinal in charge of retrieving the records burned some of the documents. Thousands of others were sold to Parisian shopkeepers who used them to wrap bread and fish. So it's no wonder that even today, archivists are finding missing documents.
We are still arranged and organize the archives. And so I think that many documents are to discover. But what? I don't know.
Our cameras were given special access to a series of private letters found in the archives. The letters offer incredible insight into the Vatican's relationship with America, such as this rarely seen letter from the Civil War. The correspondence is so fragile it must be handled with white gloves.
This letter is the letter of the President of the United States of America, Abraham Lincoln, to the Pope. It's dated 1863. With this letter, it's a formal letter, a bureaucratic letter, in which Lincoln presents to the Pope his a special envoy. The letter probably was written by the secretary of Abraham Lincoln. And the original signature of the President we can see on the other side with a different ink, and we have the original signature of Lincoln.
When he sent the letter, the Civil War was raging. Confederate soldiers had invaded the North. The Union had suffered more than 250,000 casualties, yet Lincoln makes no mention of the bitter, deadly conflict.
In the same year, 1863, the Pope received another letter from the rival of Lincoln.
This letter to the Pope vividly describes the brutality of the ongoing civil war and the devastation it has wrought upon the innocent. Its author, Jefferson Davis, President of the Confederate States of America.
This is not a formal letter or bureaucratic letter like that of Lincoln, but is a letter in which Davis described to the Pope the horror of wars. The real intention of this letter probably is to have a recognition from the Pope of the Confederate State.
Surprisingly, a few months later, Pope Pius replied to the Confederate leader.
The Pope wrote back, calling Davis Presidi Federatarum Americae Regionum, that is to say, President of the Confederate State.
By calling Jefferson Davis president, many believe that Pope Pius recognizes the Confederacy, triggering a diplomatic crisis in Washington. So, are there other papal letters hidden in these stacks that can shed light on more recent history? Perhaps, but if there are, no one is allowed to see them yet.
The John Paul II papers, archives, is not open to the consultation.
The personal papers of Pope John Paul II, who died in 2005, are locked away until 2080 behind this steel cage.
And here we have all the archives produced under the period of the pontificate of John Paul II.
As a rule, the secret archives don't share any documents relating to a pope until 75 years after his death. Between the Pope's personal files that are still restricted and the thousands of documents yet to be uncovered, the world's historians are anxiously awaiting what other mysteries the archives will reveal. St. Peter's Square is the most well-known part of the Vatican. But behind this famous colonnade lies an entire nation created to serve God and led by one man. Vatican City is a secluded state, shrouded in mystery. While its squares and museums are open to the public, most of the country is off limits to visitors. It's home to the Pope and the government he leads, the Holy See. As leader, his power is absolute. After all, under Catholic doctrine, it comes directly from God. The Vatican's crown jewel is St. Peter's Basilica. Its nave covers 5.5 acres, an area larger than an aircraft carrier. The artistic treasures inside draw millions of visitors each year. But little do those visitors know that what lies hidden beneath this temple to God is a city of the dead.
Vatican Hill was a necropolis. The original culture before Rome was there was the Etruscan culture, and they had a god, like the pagan gods, called Vatica, and she was the goddess of the dead, the goddess of the underworld. And so the Vatican Hill was where she lived. That's a good name for a cemetery.
Today, St. Peter's Basilica sits atop that ancient cemetery and some of the most sacred figures in Catholicism. Located directly under Michelangelo's dome is the entrance to a labyrinth of caverns where cameras are usually forbidden. It leads to perhaps the most valuable treasure in the Vatican. Cardinal Angelo Camastri, the archpriest who runs the basilica, takes us through its grottos and into the Confessio, a sacred area normally restricted to the highest-ranking members of the Church. Inside is a clue that connects to Jesus himself.
Siamo al centro della basilica. Siamo sotto il baldacchino del Bernini, siamo sotto la cupola di Michelangelo. Ancora vedete il simbolo tipico di San Pietro, che è la croce rovesciata.
The story of this grand basilica begins in 64 AD when the mad Emperor Nero sets fire to a section of slums in order to clear space for a new palace. The fire burns out of control, nearly destroying Rome. Nero needed a scapegoat. And an emerging cult calling themselves Christians, led by Apostle Peter, is the perfect target.
Peter is an outlaw. To be a Christian in that period of time, in the very early part of the Roman Empire, is to be a traitor. You are guilty of treason. It's a crime.
Nero rounded up the Christians and had them publicly executed, including Peter, their 64-year-old leader, the first disciple of Jesus Christ. According to legend, Peter asked to be crucified upside down. He felt he wasn't worthy of dying like his Savior. Peter was supposedly buried in a shallow grave on Vatican Hill. Over the centuries, that gravesite was lost. By the 4th century, Christianity has gone mainstream, so much so that Roman Emperor Constantine builds a new church on Vatican Hill. Though the exact location of Peter's grave was unknown, the church is built where his bones are rumored to be.
Constantine goes to where the local legends tell him to go, and he builds the first St. Peter's basilicas. Isn't it smart to really memorialize in a very physical way, because it's an illiterate population, the site where Peter was?
By the 16th century, the papacy has become rich and powerful and begins building a new church worthy of its influence. This new St. Peter's is the Renaissance masterpiece that still stands atop the original basilica and what's believed to be St. Peter's grave. Cardinal Camastri takes us deeper into the grottos, where some of the original basilica still remains.
Ci dirigiamo verso il luogo più sacro della Basilica di San Pietro.
This most sacred place is the Clementine Chapel, which holds the original altar and the heart of the old basilica.
Pietro è morto qui. Pietro qui è stato crocifisso. Il suo sangue si è impregnato con le zolle di questo colle. La sepoltura di Pietro è la ragione per cui è stata fatta la basilica. Dicevo che questo è lo scrigno che custodisce il tesoro della basilica.
The treasure found here is not gold or silver, but something even more valuable that still lies buried beneath the chapel's altar. It was here in 1939 that a stunning discovery was made during the papacy of Pius XII. As workers dug under the grotto floor to make more room for the tomb of Pius XI, they began unearthing ancient bricks with mysterious inscriptions, and then bones. For decades, Vatican archaeologists excavated in secret beneath the ancient basilica's floor. What they found is incredible. Running beneath St. Peter's nave was a graveyard dating back to the time of Christ. Through a passageway next to the Clementine Chapel, Cardinal Camastri gives us a rare look into this once hidden maze of ancient catacombs.
Adesso possiamo vedere da vicino il risultato degli scavi voluti da Pio XII.
30 feet directly below St. Peter's altar, archaeologists find a niche. On its wall, they discover crude etchings.
Quelle sono scritte fatte da cristiani nel 200, 300 d.C. Hanno ritrovato una celeberrima iscrizione che diceva in greco Petros Eni, Pietro è qui.
But could this ancient graffiti really indicate the final resting place of St. Peter?
È stato anche ritrovato un vano che dentro è tutto foderato di marmo, quindi vuol dire che era un vano nel quale era stato collocato qualcosa di prezioso.
The niche held a box of bones. When tested, they were shown to be the remains of a man in his 60s or 70s, Peter's age when he was martyred on Vatican Hill. The bones also had traces of purple and gold thread, regal wrappings for a corpse buried in a simple grave, and a strong indication that these are Peter's holy remains.
con una altissima probabilità che siano le ossa dell'Apostolo Pietro. In ogni modo, quello che è sicuro, questa è la tomba dell'Apostolo.
After visiting the burial site of the very first Pope, St. Peter, the Cardinal takes us to the resting place of the last Holy Father, John Paul II.
Tra la prima tomba e l'attuale tomba sono passati 2000 anni di storia della Chiesa. Quante tempeste, quante bufere, quante persecuzioni, quante persone hanno pensato che la Chiesa stesse per finire. La Chiesa continua.
The Pope's time is spent back at the Vatican, in the papal apartments, a 10-room suite high atop the Apostolic Palace overlooking St. Peter's Square. In this rare look inside Benedict's private study, we get a glimpse into the pontiff's typical workday. He is assisted at all times by two personal secretaries, Monsignors Miroslav Morzicki and Georg Gonswain. Or, as Vatican insiders have taken to calling him, Gorgeous George. Even for a modern pope, tradition dictates a classic approach. When composing papal letters and decrees, Benedict has no need for a computer. His communications are written by hand, with an inkwell and a fountain pen. Just a few steps away from the Pope's office is his living area. In his private dining room, he often welcomes cardinals and other guests for intimate dinners.
It's very relaxed. Of course, you go in dressed in cassock, and you usually kiss the Pope's ring. But then he invites everybody to pause for a moment. He leads us in grace. Then we all sit down, and then they pass the food around, which is simple but good.
That food is prepared by the Pope's two personal cooks. But one of Benedict's favorite treats doesn't need much preparation. It's orange Fanta. After a long day, His Holiness can sometimes be found in his living room, where he likes to kick back and watch the news. Benedict also keeps a piano in his living room, and though he seldom has time to play, Schubert can occasionally be heard emanating from the papal apartments. Perhaps the Pope's most impressive room is an elaborate walk-in closet called the sacristy. Inside are some of Catholicism's most valuable treasures that have been handed down by popes for centuries. Brother Edward de Lang is an Augustinian monk who gives us special access to this priceless collection.
This is not a museum. It is a treasury where the precious things meant for the Pope are kept. And most of the things here are still being used by the present Pope.
In a tradition that dates back centuries, he and two other monks are charged with attending to the Pope's robes, mitres, and other accessories. Remarkably, caring for these precious items is the monk's only earthly responsibility.
On this side, we have the different mitres. This one was worn by Pope John Paul II. These are finger rings that were used by different popes. Then here we have the pectoral crosses, which the Pope normally wears on top.
This is where they keep the Pope's staff, called a crozier. Benedict carries it during major processions.
It's not for walking, it's the sign of his authority, his spiritual power.
Some of these closet doors aren't closets at all. They're hidden passageways leading to rooms holding some of the most valuable items in the collection.
This is the stuff that popes have been collecting for centuries.
Most of the Vatican's treasures date back to the Renaissance, the height of the church. Deep inside the Vatican lies a room where the Pope's most valuable treasures can be found. The shelves of the papal sacristy are filled with precious artifacts of silver and gold, priceless gifts from European monarchs dating back centuries. And this is just a fraction of the Church's wealth. Consider all the sacred treasures inside St. Peter's Basilica, or the thousands of irreplaceable masterpieces inside the Vatican museums.
The stuff you see in the Vatican is only the half of it. Plundering kings and generals and barbarians have carted away a lot of the stuff over the centuries. Imagine if it were all there.
The Sistine Chapel alone is estimated to be worth $800 million.
Sell all of this stuff and take the money and give it to the poor. Well, that's a nice idea, but the Vatican's great works of art are also the cultural heritage and legacy of Italy. The Pope really sees himself as the protector of this legacy.
And even with the profits of the Vatican Bank, no one at the Vatican earns big salaries or annual bonuses.
It's not a money-making operation. Anything that comes in is spent on supporting the Pope's mission. It goes into the charities.
At the end of the day, the Vatican measures its own wealth not in money, but in souls. Among the thousands of granite cobblestones in St. Peter's Square lies a single white slab. It marks the spot of one of the biggest security failures in the Vatican's history. At 5:15 p.m., shots ring out. Pope John Paul II has been shot 4 times at close range. At a nearby hospital, doctors operate for 5 hours. The gunman is a 23-year-old Turk named Mehmet Ali Agca, a trained sniper who'd recently escaped a Turkish prison while serving a sentence for murder. Thousands of Pope John Paul II's faithful followers gathered in St. Peter's Square to hold a tearful vigil and await news of their spiritual leader's fate.
It was like the end of the world. Whether he would live or not, it was a very, very difficult time.
To the relief of his followers, Pope John Paul makes a remarkable recovery. But for the men protecting the Pope, nothing will ever be the same again. The shooting in the Vatican forces drastic reforms in security. Later that year, the Vatican introduces a new security measure that fascinates the public. It's called the Pope-mobile. The Pope-mobile Benedict uses today is a custom-built Mercedes-Benz M-Class SUV. It encases the Pope in double-pane bulletproof glass, and while its windows can roll down, the Pope is strongly urged to keep them up. It's equipped with 2-inch thick armor plating and a blast-proof undercarriage. The bulletproof glass is designed to stop a high-powered rifle round. When holding public audiences in St. Peter's Square, Pope Benedict prefers to use an open-top car, making him more accessible to his flock. It also makes his security detail nervous. This remarkable view from just behind the Pope's head shows how vulnerable he is. The man ultimately responsible for his safety is Dr. Domenico Gianni, director of the Vatican Gendarme.
The Gendarmeria Corps is the police of Vatican State and is in charge for all the matters regarding the security.
Members of the Gendarme always maintain a watchful eye because, believe it or not, when measured against its tiny population, Vatican City has the highest crime rate in the world. That's because the millions of tourists that stream through St. Peter's and the Vatican Museum each year are a tempting target for pickpockets. But the gendarme's chief concern is ensuring the security of the Holy Father. On Christmas Eve of 2009, a 25-year-old Swiss woman jumped the barriers inside St. Peter's. The attacker managed to pull Benedict down to the basilica's marble floor, but thanks to his security team, the Pope was unharmed. With attacks like this, and threats to his life wherever he goes, the Holy Father is accompanied by a plainclothed security detail, much like the U.S. Secret Service. But the gendarmes aren't the only ones protecting His Holiness. Popes have been defended for centuries by an elite military order. They are called the Swiss Guard. The Swiss Guard serves the Pope exclusively as his personal protectors. All 135 of them are in fact Swiss. And all have undergone military training in the Swiss Army. Located in the oldest section of Vatican City, the Swiss Guard barracks sit just steps from the papal apartments, enabling the Guard to react in a moment's notice to defend the Holy Father. Corporal Urs Breitenmoser has been protecting the Pope for 13 years. He takes us inside the Swiss Guard's armory, an area off limits to tourists, which holds weapons used to protect popes for centuries.
So this part of the armory is a museum of the antique weapons we are having since the 15th century. And what's interesting of these helmets are that here you see the papal seal of Julius II, founder of the Swiss Guards.
The Swiss Guard dates back to 1505, when Pope Julius II first hired his own mercenary force for protection. Don't be fooled by their ceremonial dress. They may be the smallest standing army in the world, but the Swiss Guard is a very real military force. Swiss Guards are highly skilled marksmen who've trained with SG-550 assault rifles and MP-7 submachine guns with armor-piercing rounds. Every year on May 6th, the Guard holds a very special ceremony, closed to the general public. It's a sacred ritual as the Pope swears in the newest members of the Swiss Guard.
The first time I was close to the Holy Father, it was a great emotion to salute him, and it was incredible.
The date holds special significance for the Guard. It is the anniversary of their biggest sacrifice. In May 1527, Rome was invaded by Charles V and his 16,000-man army.
The city itself is sacked. Men run through the church on their horses. And so Rome gets a gut check, gets just punched right in the mouth. Is it possible that the papacy is on the brink?
Outnumbered and facing certain death, 147 Swiss guards stood bravely on the steps of St. Peter's as the ancient city was sacked. They were slaughtered, but their mission was a success. As they gave their lives for the Holy Father, a detachment of guards escorted Pope Clement safely from the Vatican.
He has to run for his life. He has to run for his life and be saved by the Swiss guards, these mercenaries, and he runs a secret passage from the church to the Castel Sant'Angelo.
The Pisetto di Borgo is a half-mile escape route built inside a wall in 852. This once secret escape leads from the Vatican to the heavily fortified Castel Sant'Angelo. Here, Pope Clement held out against the invaders for 8 days before surrendering. But the Swiss Guard and the Pisetto had saved his life. Holy Week is reaching a crescendo in Rome. Easter Sunday is near. But inside the papal apartments, John Paul II is dying. At the last station of the traditional Way of the Cross procession on Good Friday, inside the Roman Colosseum, the faithful are greeted with his image broadcast live from his private chapel.
He didn't know that. He saw the feed from the Colosseum, but not the feed from his own private chapel. I almost broke down and cried because it was such a moving moment to see that.
2 days later, the Pope appears at his window, determined to bless the crowd. For 12 agonizing minutes, he stays at the window, waving away help and trying to speak. It will be his last public appearance. Over the next few days, tens of thousands of the faithful begin streaming into St. Peter's Square, standing vigil. On April 2nd, at about 3:30 in the afternoon, the Pope whispers to his two faithful assistants, "Let me go to my Father's house." And he slips into a coma. At 9:37 p.m., Pope John Paul II is declared dead.
At 37 minutes past 9, our beloved Holy Father, John Paul II, returned to the house of the Father.
But even as the Church mourns, rituals dating back hundreds of years are set into motion. Rituals that will ensure a smooth transition of the papacy.
A papal death is a starting pistol for a well-delineated system. There are procedures that have to take place. There are no questions.
In the Pope's chapel, the papal household and cardinals offer their last prayers over his body. Then, his body is placed in state in the Clementine Hall, where visiting dignitaries and heads of state come to pay their last respects. And at last, the body is moved to St. Peter's Basilica, where the public may mourn their fallen leader. Traditionally, the Pope is placed in a cypress coffin with white silk covering his hands and face. When the last prayer has been recited, the Pope is carried down to the catacombs beneath St. Peter's, where he is finally laid to rest.
Once the funeral takes place, there are 9 days of mourning called the Novem Diales.
Part of the reason for the delay is to make sure all the Church's cardinals have time to return to Rome. They must return to perform one of their most sacred duties, electing the next Supreme Pontiff. It is called conclave, a 1,000-year-old tradition full of ritual that continues today. In this dramatic footage of the most recent conclave in the Sistine Chapel, the cardinals place their hands on the Bible and swear to keep the proceedings secret. Once the last prayers are said, the papal master of ceremonies pronounces the famous words,
Extra omnes.
Latin for, quite literally, everybody else get out. The term conclave comes from the Latin cum clave, with a key. Under the watchful figures of Michelangelo's fresco, The Last Judgment, the cardinals are locked up. Inside the chapel, the voting begins immediately.
There's no politicking. They sit down, and in front of them are cards. And on the card is printed, Eligo in summum pontificem, I elect as Supreme Pontiff. And they write one name, and they disguise their handwriting. They fold it, and they march up the aisle of the Sistine Chapel, holding it up so everyone can see they're going to cast a ballot.
The votes are counted and recorded.
If somebody gets 2/3 or 2/3 plus 1, that's it. We're all done. That person is Pope. If not, they vote again, and there can be up to 4 ballots in a day. 2 in the morning, 2 in the afternoon.
Outside in the square, the crowd breathlessly awaits word. When the ballots are counted, they are ceremoniously burned, emitting a smoke that has become one of the Vatican's most iconic symbols.
The smoke goes up as black if there's no election and white if there is.
This popular tradition only dates back 200 years or so and hasn't always been predictable.
The election of John Paul I was announced with some confusion because no one was quite sure what the smoke signals were saying from the top of the Sistine Chapel. And as a result, no one was quite sure if there was a pope or not.
The stove used in the 2005 conclave was the result of the Vatican's determined attempt to get the smoke thing right. They put a high-tech attachment on the stove that used separate canisters to make the smoke.
The stove that they gave the cardinals this last time in the conclave was so complex, someone forgot to open the flue. The smoke backed up into the Sistine Chapel and started going up to the ceiling and covering Michelangelo's beautiful frescoes, which had just, for the first time in 400 years, been restored and cleaned. And these cardinals are looking up there and thinking, oh my goodness, what have we done?
While the crowds outside wait eagerly to meet him, the new pope retires to a small room off the chapel. Here, he is dressed in his new white vestments.
It's not like the American president, who's elected on a Tuesday in November, but doesn't take office until several months later, on January 20th. That man is pope from that exact moment.
The new pope then returns to the Sistine Chapel to greet the cardinals and announce his new name.
Once a man is elected pope, he's asked, by what name will you be known? So why does the Pope change his name? In 533, a man was elected Pope, and his name was Mercury. and they thought it was a pretty bad idea to have a Roman pagan god as your pope. So he took the name John. He was John II. The last pope who didn't change his name was in the 1500s.
Finally, the patience of the crowd is rewarded. 78-year-old Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger has become Pope Benedict XVI, a world leader and the head of a global church with over 1 billion followers. Many assume that the Vatican, the iconic stronghold of Christianity, is no friend to science. But contrary to this popular belief, the Church has a scientific tradition that goes back centuries. Rising up out of the long halls of the Vatican museums, this square tower is off limits to the hordes of tourists passing below. But inside is one of the most remarkable rooms in the Vatican. Built in 1580, it's called the Tower of the Winds. The Julian calendar was instituted in 45 BC by Julius Caesar himself, but by the time the tower was constructed, suspicion was building that Caesar's calendar was slipping.
This whole room is a scientific instrument created to show to the Pope that the old Julian calendar was wrong.
This room was designed to check the accuracy of the calendar by measuring the altitude of the sun at noon according to the meteorological seasons.
At midday, the sun projects a spot of light near this meridian.
On the spring equinox, the sunbeam should hit this symbol embedded in the floor. But when it came, the beam was off, proving the calendar was wrong. A solar year was shorter than anyone had thought, by about 11 minutes. Over time, those minutes became significant.
You know, 1 day a century really wasn't going to cause them a big problem, except after 15 centuries it was beginning to add up.
So Pope Gregory XIII ordered that 10 days from October 1582 be completely erased from the calendar. He also decreed that the new year would begin on January 1st, not in late March as it did before. The Protestant American colonies were slow to adopt the Pope's new system and used the old calendar for the next 200 years, celebrating the new year at the end of March. The Americans were considered fools, which is likely how April 1st became known as April Fool's Day. During the 17th and 18th centuries, the Church was at the forefront of scientific discovery. Most of Europe's scientists lived in monasteries.
If you look at who's actually doing the science, it's noblemen, medical doctors, and clergymen. What do you call data gathering? It's clerical work. Why do they call it clerical work? Because it was done by clerics. Astronomy is the one science that really elevates the human soul. Even a 6-year-old child knows enough to look at the sky and go, wow.
Pope Paul VI had a keen interest in astronomy. And when man first ventured into the heavens,
it's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
He was one of the first to address the astronauts on the moon.
Greetings and blessing to you, conquerors of the moon.
Perched alongside the Pope's summer residence at Castel Gandolfo is the Vatican Observatory. Take a good look, because it's not on any tour. here, the Vatican continues their long-standing tradition of supporting scientist priests.
We're all doing basically the kind of science that NASA and the other big organizations would never pay for, because it's too speculative, because it takes too long, because you can't get the project done in time to get tenure. We don't have to worry about that.
The point of the papacy and of the church is to bring people to salvation, to get them to believe in Jesus Christ as their Savior, so they'll be saved in heaven.
Spreading the word of Catholicism, the Church uses whatever tools are at its disposal. In a culture that values celebrity, the Pope becomes a celebrity.
I mean, this is what the Pope does. They take advantage of the culture and the media of the time to preach the gospel.
Today, the Pope is a worldwide celebrity. Everywhere he goes, he is greeted by throngs of people.
February 1931. It was a cool February morning in Rome as the papal limousine drew up outside a building on the Vatican Hill. Out stepped Pius XI.
Pope Pius XI thought it would be very important to use this new instrument of radio to be able to communicate to people beyond the borders of Vatican City, beyond the borders of Italy.
He was the one who called the Nobel Prize winner for physics, Guglielmo Marconi, to come and set up the radio station for him. We forget how important Marconi was in 1929. He was the Bill Gates of technology. He was the Graham Bell of technology. So he gets a phone call from the Pope, Pius XI, and says, I've heard about this invention. I don't understand how it works, how these radio waves work, but I know what it can do for me. It can get my message to the ends of the earth. Marconi works for 2 years to set up Vatican Radio, and this is the microphone that Pius XI uses to broadcast his first ever radio message.
For the first time in history, Catholics around the world could actually hear the Pope's voice.
Most Catholics until 150 or 200 years ago didn't know who the Pope was. They didn't know his name. You can only imagine the excitement of hearing the Pope's actual voice. It was revolutionary.
Today, Vatican Radio employs nearly 400 people. For the Pope, it remains the most effective way to preach the gospel. Sean Patrick Lovett is responsible for broadcasting the Pope's message to the farthest reaches of the globe. And today, he's invited our cameras backstage.
We broadcast in 40 different languages. We represent 90 different nationalities. So it really is like a miniature United Nations inside here.
In many of the countries the Vatican hopes to reach, radio is the only link to the outside world, which is why the Vatican spends $25 million a year on this operation, nearly 1/12 of its entire budget.
Radio is the one technological means that continues to adapt itself to modern needs and the modern times.
Radio is still the medium that the Vatican uses to reach beyond all borders. But it was television that turned the Pope into a celebrity.
Television in particular has really transformed the papacy.
Now you've got popes who are media stars virtually, jetting around to the flock around the world. The Pope, in a way, has become everybody's parish priest.
The undisputed master of the airwaves was Pope John Paul II. The camera turned the charismatic communicator into one of the most popular popes ever.
John Paul II, because he had been an actor, had that gift for being able to communicate to people using theatrical skills without being theatrical. His kneeling down to kiss the ground, his leaning over to kiss sick people. He was a master of the symbolic action. And that was perfect for television.
Now, a new medium has presented itself to the Vatican as a tool for evangelism, and once again, it may transform the papacy. This is the age of the Cyber Vatican.
Each pope has to preach to the time in which he finds himself, whether it's Facebook or Twitter. Jesus preached about the birds of the air, and now we tweet about the gospel.
For nearly 2,000 years, the Pope's message to the masses has been a one-way dialogue. But now, with the internet, the masses can talk back.
The message remains the same, the medium changes.
Unchanging in its purpose, yet constantly adapting to its times, the Vatican is like no other place on earth.
This is a spiritual entity, and there have certainly been changes over 2,000 years, but the Church is a doctrinal and moral constant.
La Chiesa continua, non per la forza degli uomini, non per l'intelligenza degli uomini, non per I mezzi di cui possiede la Chiesa. La Chiesa continua per una garanzia divina.
The thing that makes it special is the fundamental dedication to something bigger than ourselves. And as long as that's what's guiding us, as long as the Holy Spirit is there, it'll fundamentally be the same place.
The Church is trying to be in the world, but not of the world. And what's immediately important with what's important in the long term, that's something we all struggle with in our lives.